Hey everybody, Sean Sewell, Engearment.com podcast. Very excited to have my good friend Pat Flynn on for the fourth time. Welcome back, Pat.
Fourth. Wow. I figured
Cool?
third, but no, that's really cool, Sean. It means a lot. Seriously.
I appreciate you very much. It's cool you take the time to talk to my listeners and viewers. And Pat and Sam and Alex just did this Bells and Beer this weekend, and I'm actually watching the replay video right now, and it's super helpful, and it's so fun and interactive. What got you the idea?
No, I'm happy to hear that. Yeah, so Bells and Beer sounds kind of odd, doesn't it? Well, it was a tradition at our gym for many years, and it was a way just to bring community together. And for people who followed me online, they would fly out. We would get people from all over. It was really cool. And we would workshop kettlebells, just the basics. It's just a basic introductory workshop, and then we would just hang out afterwards. You know, beer if you wanted beer, but certainly iced tea is a viable option as well, or sparkling water. And it was a great tradition. We loved doing it. And we would usually host sometimes we do 2 a year, but we always did one around this time in the spring. And obviously with the coronavirus, that just was not a possibility. So me, Sam, and Alex decided, well, let's see if we can bring it online. And we tossed the idea out to my audience, and there seemed to be a lot of interest. And there was. And like I said, I was a little nervous at first because I'm like, how's this going to work? And we decided to use Zoom, but it actually worked out really well. It was super cool. So I have like the juicy premium Zoom account, so you can host a whole lot of people. And it was really neat because I didn't, as you'll see, I probably didn't figure this out until 15 or maybe even 30 minutes into the workshop that I could put on the view where you see everybody else. Oh, and that was, because I had it just the speaker view before. But once I figured that out, it was awesome because then we could in just real time just swipe through the screen and just look at people's technique and offer feedback. And I think it turned out really well. And all the feedback I've received so far has been very positive. People asking for another workshop. So given the situation, feel very fortunate. It seems to have been a good thing.
That is so cool to hear. I mean, and you're right, given the current situation we're all in, and we're all trying our best to serve our people, right? I tell you, Zoom has been super helpful for one-on-ones for the people I work with. And fortunately, a lot of people own a few kettlebells or TRX or something to work with at home, or even their body weight. But to do a group like you guys did, and engaging with 3 different presenters, and not in the same state even, like all over the place. That's our technology.
It was a little tricky because we recorded it, and we had to figure out, well, how do we get it to record the right person? So we had to keep everybody else muted for a chunk of time. And fortunately, there were no problems. Like, wow, I don't think anybody unmuted themselves and started squawking or making any funny noises. That was our fear, right? That I'm going to be like teaching the swing, and the camera is just going to be focused on somebody like snoring or something like that, right? But we successfully averted those issues, it seems, and it worked out really well. So if anybody's thinking about doing something like this with Zoom, I would say the initial test run was largely a success, and this seems to be like a good option for fitness professionals in this situation.
That's very good to hear. And am I understanding correctly, the key was if you were talking, Sam and Alex would mute, and that would focus.
That's right.
You. Okay, cool.
That's right. Because what we found out is it records whoever the premier speaker or whatever is. So, we had to do some testing beforehand, but that was the strategy we came up with, and it seems to have worked.
That's a huge takeaway. That's actionable. Like today, I'm going to use that today.
Good. Glad to hear it.
Very helpful. I have a lot of colleagues from the gym I train in. I have 3 different gyms, but we're doing Zoom meetings, and we're always trying to figure out how to focus on the person talking, or not the person making noise in the background. Because then
So everybody gets muted. That's the simple solution. Everybody except the presenter needs to be muted because it records. Unfortunately, I don't think you can just pick a screen for it to record. It will just record whoever's presenting. And so long as people don't unmute themselves, which thankfully nobody did, you should be all right.
Oh, that's good to hear. Well, that was awesome. That's very actionable. Sweet. Well, and then, so I know Zoom, you can have it record. The files are pretty big. I mean, when we do our podcast, they're like 1.5 gigs, 2 gigs. Is that about what you came out with?
Yeah. So I will say I got an email from Zoom right after that file was done processing saying, your storage is all full. I'm like, well, I bet it is. But it got it. It got it all. So
That's cool.
Mhm.
Did you
And it
record?
was, yeah, it was what, 2 hours, 2.5 hours, something like that.
Yeah, the file I'm looking at right now is 2 hours, 57 minutes, and 20 seconds.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So you'll at
sure.
least be able to get that much.
Cool. Very good to know. Oh, that's awesome. I didn't know how to use Zoom a month ago. Well, that's not true. We've done podcasts with Zoom. I never used Zoom for training like you guys did. So that's cool. Actionable, very much so.
Yeah, neither have I. That was the first time we did something like that.
Sweet. Well, good takeaways for sure. So what else you got cooking over there?
What have I got cooking?
What
We got some ham soup upstairs cooking in the literal sense.
literally
But no,
that sounds delicious.
yeah, no. What have I been working on? A lot of stuff, a lot of different writing projects. I want to get. I think I told you this before, Sean, that this year I want to try and just get some more like very simple introductory ebooks out this year. So on all different topics. So I have one on kettlebells, and I hesitate to even call that ebook. It's really just a pamphlet. And it's just like some pictures, some simple descriptions, some link to videos. So I want to do something more substantial than that. I've been taking some stuff I did in my master's program in philosophy and just trying to repurpose that into material that I think might be interesting, on various subjects, and publish that. I want to do one on intermittent fasting. Again, just a very simple introduction and overview. It's kind of like a back to basics year for me. It's one of those things that I don't know if it comes with age or what, that you just grow an appreciation of the basics and the fundamentals.
Mm-hmm.
So that's, yeah. So a lot of writing, a lot of editing, a lot of repurposing stuff these past couple weeks, and hopefully, I don't know. I need to give myself something of a hard deadline here. I'm usually pretty good with this, but I want to say I would at least want to get one or two of these out by the end of summer is a goal for me. And these are just pure passion projects at this point, which is kind of interesting because, I think this might even be worth discussing. It's kind of a fault of me, as I've always been somebody who just loves to do stuff, and I'll figure out the greater plan later in a lot of respects.
I get that for sure.
Yeah. Now that can be a fault, because in some respects, I've often found I've been spinning my tires, and I have to kind of step back. Like, okay, I need to think about this a little more systematically and strategically. But in another respect, especially when I was very young with fitness, like just getting started was so important.
Mm-hmm.
And I've seen so many people really fall into the snare of perfectionism. And they think they have to have everything perfectly clear and perfectly outlined of start to finish before they can even begin doing anything. And that seems wrong to me, because I don't even see how that's possible,
Right.
yet alone how you would ever be satisfied with something like that. So I try to stay somewhere in the middle. All right, what is the long-term vision here for most things? But at the same time, I can't let perfection get in the way of progress. So that's all a very long-winded way of saying I've got a lot of stuff in the oven right now, Sean, working on a lot of different projects, on a lot of different things, and we'll see how it comes along.
That's exciting, man. I get you. And I'm, like you said, I will find myself creating content or shooting videos or getting real deep in the woods on something and realize, like you said, I just been spinning the wheels, and one of those would have been good enough to serve the audience, not 20 variations of it. And so yeah, I'm guilty of that for sure, especially right now. Like I'm still testing gear over here, which is kind of crazy to think about. Like right now I've got a tent on my deck, and much to the chagrin of my neighbors, there's a big blue tent on our deck, and I slept in there last night. I've been sleeping in there off and on for 2 weeks to test it. But yeah, I mean, I could have got that done in like 20 minutes as opposed to however much time I put into it. So I definitely understand what you're saying with like, and the big takeaway is make it good, make it really good, but not perfect, right? Just get it done.
Yeah, at some point you need to have to, and this is, I always love these conversations because they're always good reminders for myself too, is that at some point you have to hit publish. Like that's inevitable. And I think it's very easy to become your own worst critic. And I know I felt this way about all my work, books, articles, emails. At the same time, I think it is important to have a sort of sliding scale of standards. So I think it is obviously worthwhile to have a higher, to have a higher degree and more criticism for a more substantial piece of work, right? I'm going to put more time into editing a book than I will in email, for example. But making sure that you have some type of some way, I guess, of determining when good enough is good enough for any particular project, I think is
Yeah.
really important. And how you define that, how you determine that, I think I mean, I could share some of my ways of doing it. I think it's highly, from all the great creatives I know, it seems to vary wildly, but they all have some way of determining,
Right.
right?
Yeah.
Either it's a number of edits or amount time spent, or just like when their wife cracks them over the back of the head or something like that,
That's
right?
what
There's
we're
some,
here. Yeah.
yeah, there's like, stop being stupid, just get it out, right? And like, look, I've been there too, but there's some way of determining, when that point has to come where you just have to step out of your own way and just get it out there.
I like that. That's very helpful. I know I was on a podcast a few weeks ago about creating content for fitness professionals, like how to shoot a fitness video, like yours are fantastic. They're approachable. They got your music in there, which is always awesome.
Thank you.
Yeah, they're great edits. And then I see some other stuff people put up and I'm just like, could have tried a little harder. The audio, the angle, the iPhone or whatever you're using, just, give it a test.
Right. And like, look, I have those videos too, and I have that writing as well. But there's value even in that. Like, I go back and I look at some of my original. Please, nobody do this. Please, nobody go back and look at my first videos on YouTube. I just don't do it. But I keep those up there as sort of a reminder to myself that there's at least been a little progress in Pat Flynn's life.
Right.
Right. And that's helpful, because I look at these things, I'm like, oh my gosh, how could any human ever produce something so awful?
Yeah.
But you learn from that in different ways. You can learn, one, you can feel motivated, but like, okay, at least I'm not that bad anymore. But you can also learn from it through legitimate criticism of yourself, of saying, okay, you know what? That's a little off. I can fix that next time. I'm saying a little too much or like a little too much. Two things that I'm currently working on as I listen back to my older podcasts. And you sometimes have to do that, and it's painful because nobody likes to see themselves on camera. Well, I shouldn't say that. I bet Morgan Freeman likes to see himself on camera. I couldn't imagine, or at least hear himself. I couldn't imagine that he hears his own voice and is dissatisfied. It can't be like me, where I hear my own voice. I'm like, I just want to punch myself in the neck.
Morgan Freeman could read the recipe and I'd be happy.
I agree. So, okay, maybe not everybody, but I think for most people, the general impulse is to be thoroughly disgusted whenever you go back and review something, whether you're on camera, whether it's your own writing, or even in music, right? The worst thing is like when you lay down that first track and you go back and listen to it, you're like, oh, I should just quit forever, right?
Yeah.
But that's how you improve, right? Like it's the crappy first draft. There's always a crappy first draft, and all the great writers acknowledge this, and the best writing books admit it. Like, look, you're seeing the final draft here, but let me show you the first draft of this, and it actually gives you a lot of hope. It's like, oh wow, they struggle in the same way that I struggle, and this is actually really inspiring. So as long as you can get over that initial disgust, I guess it is.
Yeah.
It can be really valuable to go back and review your work.
Oh, that's great context. And like you, when I go back and review even prior podcasts from 2 months ago, just like you said, I'm constantly making sounds in between questions, and I'm like, oh, shut that guy up. Oh, it's me. Stop doing that.
And and the funny thing is chances are for most of that stuff, you're probably the only one who cares about it, or at least like really is bothered by it. But still, it's ways to polish your technique and to become more of a technician. Yep. So yeah, I recommend it to people who are trying to develop any skill. If you want to get better at writing, you got to get better at editing. If you want to get better as a musician, you need to listen back to your playing. If you want to get better at moving, you need to watch how you move.
That's a key right there.
Yeah, and review. It's the process of review. If your process of self-development doesn't have a process of review, then you're missing a huge opportunity.
Absolutely. No, that's well said. And I know, for fitness stuff, I always recommend to my people record themselves like you do, like record yourself and review it, not because you're narcissistic, but because you can see. And then and if you want to share it with your coach, they can see and help cue. And yeah, reviewing. I have my wife review stuff oftentimes,
My wife is one of the first proofreaders of anything that I write. She's absolutely ruthless, which I value, right? That's what I want.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I want the hard truth for this stuff.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's exactly everything that you just said. A review is how we can reflect on criticism, that if it comes from ourselves, we can give ourselves valid criticism. Not all of it is, and we have to be able to discern what is valid and what is just self-loathing.
Yeah.
And sometimes that's hard, but we have to try and make those distinctions. And one way to help make those distinctions, like you said, is don't be the only one who reviews your own work.
Mm-hmm.
Get a coach, get a mentor, or even just a colleague who you feel will give you some honest feedback, some honest criticism.
Absolutely. No, that's well said. And I know right now a lot of people have a little more time in their hands, and so it's been kind of fun because people are sending stuff my way as friends or as colleagues. Hey, what do you think about this? And honestly, most of the time I'm really blown away with their creativity. I'm like, wow, that's really cool. I run with that, But maybe they get lost in their own mind and they don't see it that way anymore because they've spent so much time in this process. They can't see what they've created and the beauty of it,
I agree. Yeah, absolutely. So what have you been working on, man? What projects you been stewing up?
It's been really fun. Training people remotely, which has been great. I had the online mountain fitness school, which has been a good success. And I'm going to do a home version of that. So I'm going to say, hey, we're all at home, obviously, or maybe you have a backyard or a deck, but let's take it from the mountain, which is where I record the first one, and just put it at home. Have your dog there, have your kids there. And then I've actually found some ways to tweak it, add some cleans and jerks and offset squats and overhead carries and some fun stuff.
Very cool.
Yeah, so I'm really excited about that. And since I made the last one, I've got a better camera, better lens, better audio. So that's like my fun passion project. I hope to get that done in the next 2 or 3 weeks. And then podcasting with a plethora of really great people. Thanks to you, Dan John, last week. That was a freaking blast.
Yeah, he's a treat, isn't he?
He really is.
Mm-hmm.
My goodness, like you, we get to talk for hours about everything. We were laughing our butts off too. It was a good time.
So, yeah, no, I have to go back and catch that one. I haven't heard it yet. What was the theme of the conversation?
I wish I knew. I don't know.
That's how Dan is. So I talk to Dan every week on my show. And if you asked me back a few days ago, I would probably, what did we, because you're so absorbed by it.
Yeah.
And it's not because it wasn't a good conversation. It's actually precisely because it was such a good conversation.
Oh, exactly. I can recall a backpack his daughter keeps in her trunk. And I was like, I keep one with my wife too. She has a go bag. And we talked about lots of things. Like you said, like just a great lively conversation.
Yeah, that's cool. Yeah, Dan's a great guy. So we have this, but for your listeners, I have a weekly segment where I just outsource my fitness content that day to Dan. He just saves me so much work. Hey Dan, here's a microphone, talking to it, and we'll put it on my podcast and pretend like I'm actually doing something.
It's good interaction with you guys for sure. He's really good at telling stories, good stories.
Yeah. And that's such a talk about valuable skills. And that's something that I think, I don't want to speak for him directly, but I think he would say that is something that he has studied and really practiced.
Mm-hmm.
And he often talks about the importance of a classical education and reading the great novels and trying to understand storytelling, because he sees that stories connect with people in a very deep way and in a very emotional way. So especially even if you have just like a simple fitness truth that you want to communicate, if you could somehow embed it into a story, you might be able to make that truth sticky in a way than if you just gave like a kind of abstract or boring description of what you're trying to. And Dan is the guy to go for that. He's so good at that type of presentation. Yeah,
he's colorful. He has a nice story about it, like you said, a very personal story, often relatable, very entertaining, always.
Oh yeah, always good laughs with him. Yeah, that's cool, man. Yeah, rocking and rolling. Podcasting is fun, isn't it?
It really is. You know what? Like, to think about this time last year, I didn't have a podcast. I had the YouTube channel, had these, Engearment writers with reviews for North Face and Patagonia, really cool stuff. And I realized we have access to people. All of us have access to people to communicate with and talk with and ask questions and learn from and share that discussion with other people. And podcasts, what a great way to do that. Most of us will not right now, but drive or do something where there's audio on. And as much as I love music and creating music, I'd rather almost as much learn and better myself, and put on your podcast and put on other podcasts, and just imagine yourself as a fly in the wall in that room.
Yeah, well, thank you. I mean, I completely agree, and I also have to say that it's been fun because I don't want this to come off the wrong way, but I guess it's true. It lets you be a little bit selfish too.
Yeah.
And I'll say, like, most of the conversations I have on my podcast are just because I want to talk to these people that I find very interesting on subjects that I'm really interested in.
Absolutely.
And it just so happens that people sometimes want to listen in on that conversation, which is super fortunate.
You get it more than anybody I know, man. It's been crazy, like to be able to say, "Hey, Pat, you want to chat on Monday?" And you're like, "Yeah." And last week, Pat Rigsby and then Dave Whitley, and he ripped a deck of cards in half on the screen. I'm like, "What? How's this even possible?" It's like, your heroes are over there, but they're like right here, and they want to talk too. And it's cool.
Yeah, it's so cool. It's been such a treat, and even now, kind of a blessing in disguise of this whole pandemic is that since people are at home, they're more available to podcast. So
Right.
I've been reaching out to people who I know are otherwise extremely busy. They're speaking, and I'm like, hey, first off, hope everything is okay and you're doing well. If so, do you have? And most of them have said, yeah, I'm bored out of my mind. Let's do it.
Right. Well, you got a big guy, John Biardi, last week. How cool is that? Like,
Yeah,
that's huge. I'm only halfway through that one, but my God, that's a person, like everybody you're talking to and everybody I've been able to talk to are people would hire for a good amount of money for a service to learn from. And then they can jump on a podcast with you and Dan and everybody and just hear them talk as people. It's amazing.
absolutely. So John was really interesting because we've always known of each other, but that was the first time we had a conversation, as I think the podcast noted. And it happened because his latest book is with the same publisher as my latest book.
Right.
And we share the same PR lady. I forget what her formal position is with the publisher. And she just connected us. And she's like, I thought you guys might, want to have a conversation. I'm like, absolutely we do. And the even kind of funnier thing about his book, I don't know if you've read it yet, or Changemakers, he actually makes a case for generalism in the book. There it is, right?
Yep.
He talks about generalism, not in exactly the same way that I do, but he's a strong advocate of it, which is kind of ironic because that is exactly what my book was about, right? So we're like, super cool. Let's dive in here. And he had some really awesome insights specifically for the fitness industry of how he approaches that. Because for John, he's got his PhD. He's somebody that people think of as like a highly trained specialist. Mm-hmm. Yet he wants to say, no, look, so much of my success is focusing not just on depth, but the breadth as well, and making sure that I'm acquiring new skills and stacking skills and combining skills to form the competitive advantages that I would definitely lack if I just stayed in a very narrow lane. Mm-hmm. Right. Yeah. So that was a cool, he was a super, super nice guy. I really enjoyed that conversation. So I'll be inviting him back on at some point.
That's so cool. I look forward to that. I was on a webinar with him and some other professionals maybe 3 weeks ago. They're talking about how to best navigate for fitness professionals through this situation. And was he in Arizona when you guys were talking?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
All right, cool. Because he's Canadian, right? And so
that's what I gathered. Yep. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So renting a house in Arizona and just kind of hanging out. And he's so intelligent. Like, there's been so many great webinars popping up for people in our industry as well as in the outdoor industry, and I'm sure other industries as well, about how to navigate things, and SBA loans and payment protection programs and all these new helpful services, which, I'll go on record saying I've applied for the PPP and I've applied for anything that is related to what I can, help my business thrive and get through.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
But, it's been so fascinating talking to people like Pat Rigsby about this and what he recommends, and pivoting to serve our students, our clients online, which is something you've already done for a long time. I don't know. Are you noticing anything that's actionable for, say, a person who's a personal trainer who's for the first time ever, their gym is closed, they don't have access, but they have a phone, right? Or they have a laptop. Mm-hmm. I mean, they can still serve their people if people are motivated and such. Like, what are you seeing, like, from your point of view with this?
Yeah, I'm seeing a lot of different things. Just to give some immediate context, one of the co-hosts of Bells and Beer, my really good friend Sam, he is a gym owner, right? So
Yeah.
he's somebody who's had to shut the doors, not permanently, thankfully, but just because of the lockdown. And so he's, feeling the stress and pressure of all this. So, part of the reason I wanted to do this is because I want to be able to help him out too, right? Like, it's, but I would say, I've seen a lot of really, I'll say what I have seen, and then maybe I'll say what maybe I would recommend. I've seen so much creativity
Mhm.
and such cool adaptability in the circumstances of people very quickly transitioning to teaching, to phone consults, to Zoom personal training sessions, to Zoom classes and stuff, kind of like what we did with Bells and Beer. And I have a lot of friends in the industry that are saying, to be perfectly frank, like, hey, this isn't an ideal situation. I'm not hitting any PRs monetarily this month, but I'm going to make my mortgage, right?
Yeah.
And that's, sometimes that is the PR, right? So we say in times like these, like plateauing is the new PR. Like that's a good thing, right?
I like that.
Yeah. And hey, like given the circumstances, that's cool. And I think if people recognize too, especially if you already have, a great community and you're bringing value, people want to stick by your side, right? And you don't have to be shy about saying, hey, I know this is hard for all of us, and I appreciate you. And as you know, the doors are closed right now, and I want to serve you however I can. So, uh, here's a few options, right? And people, so long as they're able to, what I have found and what I've heard from people who are in more of a brick and mortar business is, and my friend Sam is, people are sticking by them, right? They're still paying their dues. They're helping out. Now, obviously, there's going to be limits to that, right? Because some people are legitimately losing their jobs, and we'll see how long this goes on. But at least right now, it's really cool to see how people want to rally. And I've seen incredible support, even for me, like even just from my people, of people like little things of people like buying premium packages or paying full price when discounts were offered just because they said they wanted to help. I'm like,
That's sweet.
that's super cool and totally unnecessary, but I really really appreciate it.
Yeah.
And I say I'm fortunate because I'm kind of situated where I think I'm probably less affected.
Mhm.
Certainly I am. I'm certainly less affected by this because I am an online business owner than people who have brick and mortar. But even for me in the situation, people have really rallied. So yeah, I don't know if there's a deep general point in there, but I would say just understanding that people do want to have your back, right?
Yeah.
They do. And that as far as they're able, as long as you find ways to adapt to the situation and still try to bring that value, what I have found is that people are still very eager to receive that value and support you. So don't be shy about it, I would say.
Oh, that's fantastic advice. And I hope everybody like re-listens to that part. That's very helpful and inspiring. And I can relate to that, sure. I had my gym that I go to, the train in, closed as it should. And then the gym inside the law firm I built closed as it should. And then, so some people I think are kind of in their own dealing process right now, but then there's the other part of people that are more in the growth and curious phase. And they're coming out and reaching out like, hey, I am at home and I did buy a TRX and I have a couple of kettlebells. Is there something we can do together? And I'm like, the heck yeah, there is. Like, let's jump on a Zoom right now. In fact, the guy that built that split board right behind me, I helped install his TRX and build his home gym like a year ago.
Mm-hmm.
So
perfect.
Yeah, exactly. So it's been really eye-opening and really, like you said, I've had like tears of joy because I've had people just randomly pay me $50 just because like, hey, thanks for putting up that video on using your dog as a weight for doing dog squats, just little things, right? Just give them a little bit of motivation and proving that we're doing something hopefully to serve a lot of people that get a benefit out of it.
Right. And it goes back to a previous conversation we had that it's often, really incredible and joyful to see how even in times of great suffering and even in the middle of a crisis, people can just be so virtuous, right? And you have this rallying and this knitting. Now, to be fair, on the other side of it, you have people doing some really nasty things.
Oh, yeah.
But my experience as a whole has not been that. My experience as a whole, especially, and I have a large size audience, right? So I've got like not an insignificant sample of people really wanting to step up and support not just me, but everybody else as far as they can. Again, within reason and within limits, because some people are obviously affected by this a lot more than others. And that's made me, like you said, the tears of joy.
Yeah,
for sure. Mm-hmm.
Oh man, I remember the first one that came in, and it happened probably 10 or 12 people in one day did that. Like donated 5, 50, person hired me for, a month of consulting. I'm like, wow, I couldn't get out of bed. I was so like moved by it, just really, really grateful.
Yeah, and I think that there's certain people, like me, but other people whose jobs are just less affected by what's going on.
Sure.
And I think those people, at least what I have seen, recognize that and have, stepped up in a lot of ways, which is great, which is awesome. I've tried to do that in ways, just saying like I very much acknowledge that I'm in a very fortunate situation.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't plan my business around a pandemic, but it just so happens that there is one, and I'm just, because of the nature of my business, I'm just in a more fortunate position than my friends that own gyms. So,
yeah,
what can I do? So, like little things that, I even in Strong On, just saying, hey, if you're a gym owner or you have any services you're offering online, just list them here. And we had a really nice post about that of people
that's super
just
awesome.
Just being able to promote whatever they're doing during the time, and just trying to figure out ways, because I've got a lot of friends in the industry, a lot of really good friends, and most of them are not online, and it is sad and it is tough to see. I think I even mentioned this last time. There's a few people I've talked to who have just said, yeah, don't think I'm going to be able to open back up. So I don't want to paint too rosy of a picture either, but
Oh, for sure. Yeah, that's a good point. My good friend, we built a gym together, and he closed up, and it was a very successful gym. It was a 24-hour access gym, and it wasn't a franchise. It was his baby, But yeah, it's closed, and it's sad, but that is, there is a lot of challenges currently, and probably for a bit, that people are facing for sure. My wife, works at a law firm, a very prestigious law firm. There's some big changes coming next month, big time.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So yeah, what do? We just keep trying to navigate it as best we can, right? Bird by bird. I don't know if there's a good book. It's actually a book on writing by Anne Lamott, and the idea is you're faced with, and the story she gives is that her brother was the son of an enormous project, like some project on birds, right? When he was young, and he put it off to the last minute. He was overwhelmed and crying. Brought it to his dad. He says, well, son, we're just going to take it bird by bird. Right.
Love it. I had not heard that one yet.
Yeah. Well, it's just super relevant to just that book, but that's why the title is. And I think that's great. I think that's, sometimes that's the best you can do. Right.
Right. No, I like that a lot. The one I use sometimes is, how do you eat elephant? One bite at a time.
That's right. One bite.
It's a lot of food. Oh, that's hilarious.
But, yeah. I mean, and I really wish I had some more advice on it, but there's just so much, ambiguity out there. So.
Oh, there is. Let me turn that message off. Sorry about that. Yeah, there is. There's good, there's bad, there's challenges for sure. But speaking of suffering, last when we talked about, we really got into some good stuff about suffering and how it brings appreciation, right, and context. Had no idea that between that conversation and this conversation, this would be happening. So I think a lot of people are getting a really blunt, kick in the gut, suffering, possibly for the first time at this level. So it's been very interesting watching how some people are handling it and how others are handling it too. Like you, I help run a very big Facebook group for backcountry skiing and snowboarding. And we made a very concerted effort to have a group conversation with the other admins and myself, and put a statement out saying, we're not going to go out and recreate. We're going to abide by the best practices and stay home. As much as we want to be in the mountains, as much as I love doing that, and right now is the best time of year for it, we're all going to, the admins and I, we're going to stay home. Hopefully leading by example, but then people are like, oh, there's always rights, and we have the right to go recreate. And I'm like, there's rules on this forum and doctors, and they're all chiming in like, please don't inundate our small mountain communities with your recklessness. And yeah, people, and so I guess it's been kind of good to, like, in my opinion, see what the weeds are, so I won't, recreate with those people in the future. And everybody knows who those people are and how their decision makings are. So it's been eye-opening for some people. And
Yeah, I mean, you bring up a lot of good topics for conversation. Suffering. I'm always happy to talk about suffering. I think that's a really important one. So maybe we could even circle back to that.
yes,
I know we opened up a few threads on that and I love that. That was such a fun conversation with you.
thank you.
But even the idea of like, yeah, our right to recreate. It's an interesting assertion. There seems to be something like initially plausible to it, but I don't see that, right? So, a right is something that squares with a moral norm.
Mm-hmm.
And so it just in principle, I think if you're thinking deeply and about morality, so my two primary areas of focus in my philosophical studies, especially for my master's, was on metaphysics, which is just first philosophy, study of like the deepest structure of being, reality, things like that, asking questions about causation, time and change, and fundamental reality and all that good fun stuff, right? But also morality, moral theory, ethics. And so, I would say a right is that which squares with a moral norm. So you can never in principle have a right to do something that's wrong, right? And you have to consider relevant facts, right? If there's relevant facts that make it seem clear and obvious that you might be, in a way, really potentially causing other people serious harm, your obligations to love other people, right, overrides any other, right that you would have to go kick a soccer ball around. Right. Right.
You would think it'd
Always.
be obvious, right?
Always. Yeah. Now you might in otherwise normal circumstances have every right to go kick a soccer ball around.
Mm-hmm.
Right. But there's other facts that have to be considered in the circumstances that might make your decision to go recreate something that would otherwise be at least morally neutral, right? Now something that's morally wrong. And if that's the case, then you don't have a right to do that. You might have a legal right, but not a moral right. And that's an important distinction. And it's just like everyone throws rights around. Like this is a right, that's a right. But very few people have ever seemed to want to think about, well, what is a right? Like fundamentally deep down. It's very easy just to call something a right and then just act however you want. But I think when you start to unpack this, it's a lot more conservative in ways than I think people might initially recognize, and that we have certain obligations at certain times to probably forgo certain pleasures or recreations on our point, because we have an obligation to will the good for other people, right?
Very much so, Pat. I'm glad to hear from you. I know a lot of people are across the country and across the world have, probably the same viewpoint, but I'm surprised by so many people that don't. And I'm like, wow, I don't want to say I thought higher of that person, but like really caught me off guard, because like you and I, and most people we know, see a greater good. And we're always trying to do like, what is a greater good? Like I might have to table down some of my needs and wants and let the greater good benefit, right?
Yeah. And I would even hesitate the greater good, because to hesitate using that term, because I'm not a utilitarian, right? So I'm not like an ends justify the means of it. I would just say the good, period, full stop. Right. Mm-hmm. And I guess I want to recognize something that's going on is like, okay, you can very much recognize everything that we just said and still have a healthy suspicion of government overreach as well. Sure. Right. And I think that there's instances where you can affirm everything that we just said, that, yeah, I have a moral obligation to social distance and, forgo certain things that I would very much like to do right now. But at the same time, yeah, that measure seems a little extreme. That measure seems a little much. And there I would say it's just a case by case basis. It's just too obscure. So I think there can be a very balanced and healthy middle ground. But generally I'm with you, Sean. It's just a number of people have just seemed to think that there's just sort of some abstract thing out there as your right to kick a soccer ball around, right? Yeah. Or to go clubbing. Like I remember when this all first started, like, really coming to a head, and I saw people on Instagram like at like clubs and bars, and they were like hashtagging like Corona night out and stuff like this. I'm like, oh yeah, oh my gosh. Like, yeah. Mm-hmm.
No, I get you, man. It was, from my point of view, it's kind of frustrating seeing these people. What we do already is dangerous. in the mountains, right? So that right there is a selfish act. And then to travel from different counties, that becomes selfish too. And then, there's been people caught in avalanches. Last week, somebody passed away, unfortunately. And then they put search and rescue, which are volunteers, they're not paid. Volunteers at risk, resources that could go to other places, put into use. So yeah, for me, it's kind of frustrating, but I don't know everything. I only know what I read and what I can practice. But it's interesting times to observe human behavior for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. And so much of it, I think, does is difficult as the situation is and as messy as it is. Sometimes just some very simple moral principles, sometimes even as simple as the golden rule, can just be good to return to, right?
Yeah.
If I were somebody with a lung condition, or if I were somebody who were of a certain age and alone, like, would I want you to go out and put me at a certain degree of risk, just because you wanted to have a picnic, for example, right?
Exactly.
You
Yeah.
probably wouldn't want that, right? Like, you probably would say no. Like, I would really wish that they would say, yes, I want to have a picnic right now or whatever, but I understand that I might be putting somebody at great unnecessary risk because of that. So I'll forgo that for the time being. Mm-hmm.
That's good. Well said. And honestly, I've actually appreciated, like we talked about last time, about giving things up. Like for Lent, you're giving things up. Were you giving up coffee, or what were you giving up?
It was coffee, and my friend, it is back in now, and it has never tasted so good.
I bet.
Coffee, among other things. It wasn't just coffee. Was like a last minute thing where I just felt like, all right, I'm just gonna pull the trigger last minute. I'm not gonna think about it, because then I'll rationalize myself back into it. And I'm just like, all right, coffee's out, boom, done. And I did it. I stuck to it. I felt like an idiot for the first week, but
Oh, that's impressive. Well, for you, like, I appreciate coffee too, but for me, it's thing I gave up was mountains, and outdoor recreation, and then seeing people in person, and hugging my nieces and stuff. But you know what? Honestly, I've kind of enjoyed giving all this up, because I know when we do get the chance to enjoy these things, it's going to be so much better. So much.
yeah. Yeah, absolutely, my friend. Yeah, I mean, how much, and like, we already see that, like, the cliche is absence makes the heart grow fonder, and it's a cliche because there's a significant amount of truth to it. And I know even within my family, but many other families I've talked about, they've been doing like Zoom Easters and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And like, they're having like deeper, more intimate conversations that I have in years, right? And like, people are like coming back into the fold that they have been estranged and stuff like that. And so that's all, I think, a very wonderful blessing. And it's cool to see how the kind of forced separation has actually brought people closer together in more significant ways, not physically, of course.
Yep.
But
Very true. I'm glad to hear that from you too. Yeah, I totally agree. And most everybody I've talked to has said something in their own words of like, though there is more space, people are closer together emotionally and spiritually and bonding. It's been really, really amazing.
Mm-hmm. Now, that said, I hope that this resolves fairly quickly here. Right? But
sure. I definitely want to go high five my friends and hug them and go run around and live life again, for sure.
Yeah, that's right. Because that's for you, especially being so much about the outdoors.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, I can appreciate how difficult that would be. Mm-hmm.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that you can see how much that is. And, for my riders too, a lot of these people, like, fortunately I have a wife and dogs and, a good social structure, but a lot of the riders we have are single, and like, their lives are based around their recreation, whether it's mountain biking or rafting or rock climbing or whatever it is. And it's also their wherewithal. Like, that's how they put food on the table. And so a lot of my friends and colleagues, I've had I've been very fortunate that I can reach out one-on-one, have a FaceTime with them, let them cry, let them talk, let them process everything, and hopefully let it get off their chest and experience and accept what's going on, right? Because a lot of people are either in denial or they're processing in different ways. It's not necessarily healthy. So, with our backgrounds of, dealing with anxiety and depression and ups and downs and all kinds of challenges, right? And being very open about it. I think that's hopefully allowed other people to be a little more vulnerable, a little more open to talking about it, and seeking an ear, seeking somebody to talk to. So
I really hope so. And that's one of the major reasons that I love having these conversations. And we talked about this before, but I think it's worth at least a summary of a repeat. And that is, when I was very young and really started having like instances of anxiety and depression, the kind of thing that always made it even that much more horrible was that you just think that you're the only one
mm-hmm.
that's having that, right? And that's statistically demonstrably false, right?
Yeah.
It's just not true. And so having those types of conversations, I hope gives people hope and realize, hey, like, we're all struggling. We've all got our often many crosses to bear.
Mm-hmm.
So let's bring them to the forefront and see how we can help each other out with this stuff.
That's beautiful. Honestly, I was on your podcast, I think a year and a half ago or so, when you brought up about the anxiety, and I was already a fan of your work. And when you brought that up, I was like, all right, I'm a big fan now, because he had the wherewithal to talk about this. And and I know we talked about this last time. I'm not the only person who appreciated that, I'm sure. So yeah, the fact that
well, it's interesting with anxiety because it seems to be even more of a taboo for men, right? Because there's something about, well, you're a man. How could you be anxious? And the funny thing is like, that's just not how anxiety works, right? Some of the most courageous, manly people I know have horrific anxiety.
Mm-hmm.
And it's often about really weird things, right? That's how anxiety works. Like people will be like, Pat, how are you? You get in front of crowds and you can speak and you music and you always put yourself out there on the internet and you get all this criticism. Like, doesn't that make you anxious? And I'll be like, no, but let me tell you what really does make me anxious. All these weird phobias that I have.
True.
Because it's a disorder, right? And there's lots of layers to that disorder. And virtue is often relative. It's objective, but it's relative. It's objective because we really are perfected in virtue, but it's relative because how somebody develops virtue will always be relative to their situation, to their context, to their environment, and to their life. So in some sense, somebody who's got a severe phobia of cats, who somehow manages to overcome that and pick up a cat, is showing an incredible amount of virtue, and might even be showing more virtue than somebody who's storming the beach at D-Day, but they're doing so because they're just reckless, right? And they're like bloodthirsty. Now, from a third person perspective, you might think that the second person is more virtuous, but in an interior state, you realize, no, actually one is in vice because they just like killing or something like that, right? Whereas the first person is really the more virtuous and courageous. And don't get me wrong, people who go to war, obviously I have, and fight for their country and stuff like that, nothing but the highest respect. It's just a simple, to give an illustration of how I think is a better way to think about virtue, and that context and situation really bears in heavily on this.
That was a good analogy, actually. Very good analogy. Yeah, you're right. Gosh, yeah, I love talking about this kind of stuff too. And, honestly, I've even had people I train for fitness, like, contact me. My anxiety is so high right now. I can't even muster the courage to have a visual. And I'm like, I get that. I totally get that, And I just tell them, you know what, I'm here for you. No judgment. You just process, you breathe, you go to your deck and get some fresh air, and we'll reconvene when we need to. But, especially as a man, that's kind of hard to admit, like having those emotions and those fears, and they're not logical. Like, if anybody saw from the outside, like that person's just making no sense, but it's all to me.
Look, I'm literally trained in logic, right? I think I'm a pretty logical thinker. And that's the funny thing about anxiety, is like, you can know this is not rational. Like, it. You're like, no, like, this is totally irrational. Yet it's still there. Right. Yeah. That's why it's such a disorder, because you can think through it, but that doesn't necessarily help you solve it. Mm-hmm. Right. And that's just the interesting nature of the beast. Right. It's like, I know, like, and especially, so fortunately through various efforts which we can talk about, I've really reined in the severe anxiety that I had. Like, I used to be straight up agoraphobic, right? Couldn't even get out of the house. It was bad, just constant panic attacks, stuff like that. But even when I was young, right, I knew, like, this is stupid, right? Like, the things I'm worried about, like, I know this isn't true, right? So, like, you have it, like, figured out rational. And that isn't always the case all the time. Some people with anxiety really think like they're having a heart attack or something like that. But, like, I would resolve that stuff. Go, anybody with anxiety pattern, you've been hooked up to a heart monitor at some point, right? You've had the doctor at some point say, no, look, you're fine. So like you get to a point where okay, no, I know what this is, right? And then with the anxiety loop, what then becomes the source of anxiety is anxiety itself,
Mm-hmm.
right? So once you kind of like get like some rational clarity or some empirical clarity of, okay, now I'm not having this health ailment or that ailment, then you can get in the anxiety loop of being anxious about your anxiety state, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that's the classic anxiety loop. And that itself is not really something that you can reason through. And believe me, I've tried. So it's very just important to understand the nature of anxiety, right? It's not something that you're going to solve through logical thinking, really. At least that was never successful for me. It's something you have to take a completely different approach to. You have to desensitize your nervous system. You have to have a method. And we talked about this a little bit last time. You have to kind of do everything that is counterintuitive in the face of anxiety. You have to face the anxiety. You have to not run away from it. You have to not tense up in front of it. So don't tense, don't run away from. And then you have to learn to float, right, with the anxious feelings. And then the big one that I always struggled with was you have to learn to be patient, extremely patient, and constantly remind yourself of those previous steps. And how long is patient? A couple hours, maybe a couple months, maybe, right? Like very patient. Like a couple months is not unreasonable to begin to literally rewire. A lot of it is just rewiring the hardwiring, right? And that's the super cool thing about the brain and neuroplasticity is we can actually do that. Like we can actually restructure our brains by the way that we choose to consciously think. And a lot of anxiety is just unconscious thought patterns that we've grooved in through negative thinking patterns. And we can begin to restructure that, but it takes time. So the patience is really a key, and you have to have a very simple method. So I like that 4-step method. Don't fight, don't run away from, learn to float, or sag. Don't tell yourself to relax because you'll just tense up, but words like floating or sagging, and then just being patient and always, and just like gentle noting techniques, right? Of like when you have an anxious thought, don't give it the second fear. And we talked about the second fear. So the first fear is sometimes subconscious, automatic. It just pops up, boom, anxiety. The second fear is when you start the what if line of thinking. What is that? What am I about to have another anxious episode? Like that's when you add the second fear. And that's what you can respond to. And that's what you can get under your control. So even when the first wave of fear hits, you can still just give it a note and say, oh, that's an anxious thought. Just very gently. Or, oh, that's an anxious feeling. Just identify it for what it is. Deep breath, sag, float, and then just, note it, acknowledge it. Don't run away from it. Relax into it using whatever imagery or words you need. And then just move on to another activity, right? But that process is important. So don't immediately distract yourself because that would be running away from. You have to acknowledge it first. Let it come. Let it in. Float, sag, whatever. Move on to another activity consciously and not in a tense sort of flighty way. And then just be really patient. And if you repeat that process over and over, and if you also practice putting yourself in situations that you know are going to trigger anxiety and repeat that process, that's how you overcome it. And it can be overcome, but it takes a lot of practice, just like anything else.
Well said, Pat. That's very helpful. I appreciate that very much. That's gonna
anytime. And a lot of the depression, so there's different forms of depression. So like a lot of the depression, and I have both anxiety and depression in my family, but a lot of the depression kind of comes as like there's different fatigues of anxiety. You have mental fatigue, you have physical fatigue, but then you like get that deep spiritual fatigue, right? Where you're just kind of at your absolute wit's end, you're exhausted and just like, oh man, it's not even worth going on anymore. Now that's when the anxiety has just wrung you dry, right? When you start becoming depressed. The good news, however, is when you start to apply the types of methods that I've been going over is that's the first thing to lift, right? Is that spiritual fatigue and the depression. So it's the last thing to set in the anxiety state. It takes the longest to build up to, but it's the first thing to lift. So that will be one of the first things to go away as you begin to reverse a lot of the nervous system sensitization and all that.
Wow. That's cool. That's very good to hear. Like you said, I've in my family, depression and OCD and audio hallucinations and all kinds, the whole gamut of interesting stuff, right?
Yeah, it's all fun, isn't it?
It's real fun to, I like problems and challenges and I like to figure them out. But It was, it's always amazing to me, like how people, what they do for cognitive therapy or spiritual or however they find to, well, basically accept and to learn to live with and not let it take over, basically.
Yeah, we talked about this last time. It's everything that I'm trying to break down into method here ultimately comes down to that one word, accept.
Mm-hmm.
And if you can just remember, I remember one of my, it wasn't a therapist, it was just a tape that I had years ago. If I remember the name of it, I'll recommend it. So maybe you could put it in your show notes because it's very helpful to me. Oh, that's it. Dr. Claire Weeks. Dr. Claire Weeks. She was a great doctor back in the 60s, and she was so ahead of her time on the anxiety issue. So she's got a book called Hope and Help for Your Nerves. And I think this is from an audio recording she did related to that book. So I'd recommend that book, but also this recording too. And she talks about exactly the method I'm describing. And this was one of those things that just did absolute wonders for me. And she just says, okay, obviously when you're super anxious, it's hard to even think straight. But if you can just remember, accept, radical acceptance.
Yes.
That's ultimately what we are going for. Because anxiety is often the result of resistance on many levels.
I love it.
Right.
I found Claire Weeks, Float Through Anxiety.
Perfect. Yeah. So she's where I get the idea of float from, right?
I like
and
to hear that.
she's brilliant. She's absolutely brilliant. And her work is, even though it's older, I think it's still some of the best out there. Like she had it herself. She had severe, I think, anxiety and panic disorder and stuff like that. And she's a brilliant scientist. She's got some really interesting, I think, published research in biology and stuff like that, but decided she really needed to take this on and became quite prominent for it.
Oh, that's incredible. I always respect people who have their own battle they've gone through in the area that they're working on. So they can totally relate to and talk in the language of.
Yeah, and I found that that's really important, and I think it's a both and, right? So you want the kind of formal credentials that would seem relevant, but then there's also just that experience you get from having been through that experience that's just utterly invaluable.
Mm-hmm.
And I can tell you the people who were most helpful for me in any area of life, but certainly when it comes to the mental stuff like anxiety, the best therapists I had and the best books I read like this one were by people who were smart, well researched, but they lived through it.
Right.
They've been there.
Yep. Mm-hmm. Very helpful.
And obviously that's not the case for everything. So like if I got to go under the knife for like some cancer operation, I'm not going to ask the doc, hey, if you had cancer, I just want to know your track record. Yeah. I just want to know your track record for surgery. Right? But there are cases where it does seem relevant. I think anxiety is definitely one of them.
Yeah, no, for sure. Anxiety, also with fitness too. I mean, how many people, yourself included, came through fitness because you had experienced something, right? And you wanted to better yourself, so you can relate.
Yeah, and people have told me that is largely a reason that they decided they wanted to work with me. And I think it's true because it can help you to empathize and sympathize, right? So since I was the chubbiest of all my friends growing up, and like I really did struggle with these things of trying to get my weight and and eating healthier and exercising, like I understand what it's like to be there. So I think I can offer something of value there. And I want to be careful about what I claim because I'm not saying that if somebody hasn't been there, they can't be a great coach and help people. That's obviously not true. But there's something that I gained from having gone through that experience that other people say that they really appreciate and that has been very helpful in our coaching relationship.
I'm glad to hear that. So my background, I didn't grow up morbidly obese or overweight or chubby, but my entire family was, right? So they were all just, disabled. My brother was mentally disabled, physically disabled. My sister had brain damage. Both my parents were disabled and overweight. And so growing up as like, I don't say the normal one, but like I can empathize like what that lifestyle was like for them and struggles. So yeah, I mean, after my brother passed, I'm like, I need to help people who want to be helped. And I don't want to, come at the regular angle of fitness, nutrition. I want to, put myself, I've been in their shoes next to them. So I can.
Yeah. What a beautiful thing. And you just have a perspective that is uniquely yours.
Oh, thanks.
And that's just a value you'll always be able to provide because of that experience. Absolutely.
I think it really helps. Obviously it's helped you and it's helped the people you help, which is really cool.
I hope so, man. I do. I hope people get stuff out of these conversations. And if nothing else, maybe they get pointed in a new and helpful direction,
For sure. And, I've got like half a page of notes so far already, and I have the link for Dr. Claire Weeks. So I'll definitely direct people towards that.
And I would say like this, like, even if you don't have like full on like panic attacks or panic disorders, something like that, like read her book anyways. Cause it's just like, it's so useful as a human being, these strategies, right? Cause chances are like, you probably have some degree of anxiety or stress in your life,
Especially
like
right
just,
now.
just right now.
Yeah.
And if that's the case, which seems like it would have to be for almost any human being alive, you're still going to benefit from reading work like hers and just get these techniques down. Like, these are techniques that will just help you to be healthier in general, even if you aren't on like the extreme end of the anxiety spectrum.
Absolutely. And it's kind of similar, I've gone through a lot of grief myself, and basically back to acceptance. I've lost everybody in my family, and my brother and my sister, it's so painful. It's hard for me to even go back to that era of them being alive. And then my brother or my father, then my mother last year, and I was working with some good therapists, and they brought up this word, complicated grief. Basically, complicated grief, you're not going forward, you're just kind of going in a circle, right? So we did some hard work, some heavy work. We faced it, like you're saying, got comfortable with it, and broke it down. And now it's not an issue hardly at all for me. So can pleasantly go back to those memories of doing fun things as kids and with my folks and all this great stuff. Like, a huge weight was lifted, but took some work, took a lot of work, a lot of patience, like you said.
Yeah. And it's one of those things. Well, first off, that's beautiful. And I'm so happy to hear that. And it's like, people recognize that if we want to be healthy physically, there's certain things that we can and should do, and they take effort. But what about mental health, right?
This is the most important.
Like, that seems hugely important too, right? So like, what are those things? And it seems like we're just now starting to get a lot more serious about that as a culture, which is a good thing. Like, better it's happening than not at all. But it is just kind of funny to see how long it's been ignored.
Right. I'm glad more people are working on it too. There's a lot of paths to do it, but it takes work, just like exercise, just like learning a song on the piano or guitar, or learning how to read or a new language. It takes work. There's no quick fix, but it's worth it. Everything that's hard and is worth doing pays off.
Yeah, it's at least worth doing badly, right? Not at all. But it's like, to your point, and a lot of times, and this is so true in fitness, and sometimes I have to, if people want to work with me and I'll do an initial assessment, I'll say, look, I think, and like, I'll say it in the most charitable way that I can, but I think you need a psychologist, right? Not a personal trainer. And a lot of people, because they're just not aware of the resources that are available, or they just haven't had, somebody present the possibility to them that maybe they're trying to solve something with fitness that isn't a fitness problem.
See that?
Right.
Yep.
Yeah. And you see it a lot, and I see it a ton. Yeah. And it's like, look, I don't think getting rid of 1% more of body fat is really what you need right now. It just isn't. And like, I would love to help you. I'd love to be your coach, but to just be honest, I just don't think that this is what you need.
Right.
And I have to have those conversations fairly frequently.
And how do they go over for you? I mean, it might help some new trainers out there, but how do you approach that?
Well, I always try to, because to me, I think we have a dual moral obligation, right? We have a moral obligation to tell the truth, right? And to try to get it right. But we also have a moral obligation to be respectful to people. And that's and sometimes I think people can forget one at the expense of the other. And that's when like vice comes in, right? So there's some people who just think, I don't care how mean I am when I say it, or if I even have to make fun of somebody, I'm just going to say what's true. And there's something definitely wrong about that. Like, that's bad for you, because then you're just becoming a cruel person, right? That's kind of how morality works, right? The whole point of morality is to understand what human nature is and how to flourish as a human being. And cruelty is a vice, right? That's something that's missing from us that should be there, like compassion, like willing the good of other people. So that's not right. But the opposite isn't right either, where you just kind of say a bunch of pretty flowery things to people to avoid telling them what they need to hear.
Yeah. There's a difference between nice and kind, right?
Or I would just say even between nice, kind, and loving, right? So loving is willing the good of the other for the other because they deserve it.
That's good.
And, you know, most people think of their kids in this. Like, I would do anything for my kids just because I love them so much. And that is the nature of love, right? Willing the good of the other for other. And there's a saying called tough love, right? And all parents are familiar with this. Like, sometimes love means disciplining. It just does. And it can mean hard truths. But they should always be hard truths presented in the best way that you can possibly do them. So that way you're fulfilling that dual obligation to make sure people are receiving of the respect and dignity they deserve as people, but also receiving of the truth that they deserve as people.
Mm-hmm.
And that's not an easy thing to do.
No.
But look, virtue is not an easy thing to attain. So why should we expect it to be easy? Vice is the easy thing, right? It's easy to either be mean or to not care about telling the truth. Those are the easy things to do. So that's the general way that I approach it. And then how that looks for every person is just, and sometimes it doesn't go over well, if I'm being honest.
Yeah.
But I'll tell you what, I had a client or a potential client that I said this to, and I said, we can't work together because I just don't think this. And I didn't get the nicest email in response, I'll be honest, even though I think I did the best job. But then about 2 months later, I get an email of incredible gratitude saying, sorry, I was totally a word that's inappropriate for a podcast. But I went and I saw a psychologist and you were absolutely right.
Oh, that's so
and that of course made my year. And I'm like, don't worry about it. It's totally cool. And hey, maybe we can work together in the future sometime. So that was an example where it definitely wasn't initially well received. I thought like, okay, maybe I could have phrased things better or differently, but I thought I did a generally decent job of trying to do what I thought needed to be done. But yeah, the initial response was pretty terrible, but then later on it was really actually quite worth it.
That's so cool to hear that. And I'm sure, anybody getting feedback they didn't anticipate, get reactive, sure. But
well, I mean, there's a form of rejection there. Nobody likes that. Right. And most people are really surprised, like almost like, how dare you? I'm offering to pay you money and you're saying no.
Right.
And but as a business, it's not smart to just accept anybody willy-nilly as a client, because if they legitimately have a problem you can't solve and they think you're going to solve that problem, they're going to be disappointed and they're going to be dissatisfied with your services. And I would argue in the long run, that's actually going to do more harm than good, because you're just inevitably not going to be able to give that person the value they need in their life. And that might just mean them leaving a bad review or asking for their money back. So I think even just from a practical standpoint, you shouldn't just accept anybody.
That's really good to hear. I mean, honestly, that took me a while to figure that one out. The first few years of my business, I took anybody and everybody because I really wanted to help everybody. But also I didn't realize the emotional vampires and like the energy vampires are out there. And also, and I couldn't help them, like you're saying. And so now I interview, if I do work with somebody, I interview them and vice versa to make sure it's a good fit and the services are correct. Because it is an investment on both people's time and resources.
Yep. And that's exactly what I do too. We have the initial discovery calls, and at the very least, just helping to set those expectations of saying, hey, look, here's what I think you really need.
Mm-hmm.
And this is my honest assessment. Now, if you still want to work together, okay, but we just need to be very clear about what I can address and what I can't address. And if they're willing to accept that, then maybe there's still a possibility there. Again, it's just a sort of case by case thing, but you just need to expectations are key for business owners.
Yes, it is. And relationships in general, I think.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
It's a source of stress for a lot of people is unmet expectations or unrealistic expectations.
That's right. They say all disappointment arises from unrealistic expectations. There's certainly a lot of truth to that.
Oh yeah, on a lot of levels. This is always so fun talking with you, Pat. I love this. This is such good conversations.
Yeah, no, and always a joy. I mean it. Mm-hmm.
Well, pleasure is all mine. A last question for you. What are you working on music-wise right now?
Oh, yeah. So I was back on the piano again. We actually had a piano injury in my house the other day. Can you believe that?
How's that work?
Yeah, right. How does that work? So my son was doing a piano lesson, and the stand collapsed and it fell on his foot.
Whoa.
Yeah, we thought it was broken at first, and we're like, oh gosh, now we need to go out and go to the urgent care, and there's this virus going on, but it looks really bad. So we need to do this. Fortunately, the urgent care was completely empty, and they're like, we had nothing going on here. So that was good. And also, fortunately, it wasn't broken, just pretty mangled up. It's funny now, of course,
Yeah.
but like he was, and like kids heal so quickly. Like it was like there was this huge dent in it, and it was like bleeding, and it was the keyboard that like just fell, and his foot got caught in the stand. It was pretty gross, honestly, and but now it looks like perfect. It's like, what kind of like mutant gene, Wolverine gene, do you have as a child that you just like? I would be limping around for months after something like that happened to me.
Relatable.
Yeah, so music wise, been back trying to crank up more, because I always try and allocate a certain amount of time to either guitar or piano, and I'm just about to switch back to more time on the guitar again.
Cool.
And I've got about, I don't know, I probably got about 5 or 6 tracks on the hard drive right now that I just need to, it goes back to the beginning of this conversation. I need to just hit freaking publish on these things, honestly.
Yeah.
They're at the point where it's like, and actually you probably heard a few of them, because I think I put a few on just some of my recent YouTube videos, but I haven't put them on like my SoundCloud yet or anything like that. And I've got 2 or 3 more ideas that I want to start building out. And this is something for me that has no strategic endpoint. It's just pure creative outlet. Mm-hmm. So I'm working on stuff. I'm practicing things, just learning some new tunes. I've been revisiting some old Megadeth, which is fun again.
Really? Nice.
Yeah. I think I told you last time I tackled the old Tornado of Souls. So that's a video on my Facebook page if anyone wants to see me taking a shot at that solo.
Yes.
Yeah, pull it up, dude.
Yeah.
For sure. Pat, just look at my videos. You'll see me with the old guitar there, playing that. If anyone's interested, they can see my attempt. So that was one of those things where I was such a Megadeth fan in high school. I learned so many of their tunes, but I kind of left them in high school. So I'm like, I'm going to go back to some Megadeth and do that. So that was a good exercise. And whenever you learn something like that, especially a song that is as awesome as Tornado of Souls, it influences your own creativity. So that's always valuable.
Sure.
So yeah, just been working with Marty Friedman and Megadeth again, of just like my exercises musically, because he's such a brilliant technical musician. He's so melodic, yet he's just so competent. It's just like everything that you wish you could be, but no, you never will be.
That's so true.
And then I just finishing off these tracks that I've been cooking up, so I won't bore people too long with the details there. But I do have, if you want to sample, probably my YouTube channel, because if nothing else, if you go to my YouTube channel, listen to my tunes, you'll at least get a decent workout out of it, even if you hate the song.
Right.
So your chances of it being an absolute loss are pretty low, right? And maybe you'll like the music too. Who knows?
Oh, that's awesome. And how fun to be able to create the music for the video you're creating to help people. And they don't know it, but they're getting an audio benefit too.
Yeah, my favorite thing of all time, it hasn't happened as quite frequently as I would love, is when somebody asks for the song and I'm like, oh, I will tell you.
Yeah.
You want to know? You want to get my attention. I can't obviously answer all the comments that come on YouTube, but if you wanted to get my attention, insider secret, just ask something like that. And,
That's beautiful. I love it. Oh, always so much fun, Pat. Well, I'll let you get back to your busy stuff and learning some stuff on the guitar. And I'm pulling up on your Facebook, so I'll share that as well so people can see you kicking butt.
Cool, man.
Yeah. Much love to you and your family. And
likewise, my friend. Mm-hmm. Always a pleasure.
Pleasure's been all mine. I'll chat with you soon.